The topic of the day is going to be about Nostr, GMB, or Good Morning Bitcoin. Back in the day, like around 2014, I found out about Bitcoin and started blogging about it on a site called Google+. And it was really cool because to post anything, anybody in the world would find it, and it was a great way to communicate with other users. Around that time, I started posting, and every day I would go in and share more about just Bitcoin and other digital currencies. One day I logged onto my Google Plus account and I went to go share some news, and it turns out I couldn't share anything. The site was just blocking me, was saying that I couldn't share. This was kind of during the time around 2017 when Google was going through their adpocalypse, if anybody remembers that from the old YouTube days. In that, they decided that certain things wasn't advertiser friendly, and one of those, unfortunately, was Bitcoin. So they blocked my ability to share to my community that I kind of formed about Bitcoin. That was devastating to me because this was something I was spending 3-4 hours on every day, just trying to find all the latest news, give a little recap of this stuff, and share with people on the web. And as you can see, I got to like 125, 130,000 followers that people were interacting with me every day and talking about the different news. And now suddenly my ability to communicate had been wiped out. And the reason that is it's kind of how the old web worked. When you talk to people, or when you go to a website, let's say Twitter, for example, and you go to Twitter, you are using Twitter's own website to talk to Twitter's own database. There's nobody else that you're really working with. You're working with the site that you're using. And the bad part about that is it gives them full control of all the data that you use. Even more crazy enough, it gives them the ability to own the data and control what the data is. So for example, if I go on Twitter right now and I say Elon Musk sucks and he's horrible, Elon can just delete that tweet. He can delete my account. Or even worse, really, he could change that tweet to say that Elon Musk is awesome and Good Morning Bitcoin is absolute trash. There's nothing there that verifies that the data that I put on Twitter ever is the real data that should exist. And that creates a lot of issues because it impinges on our ability to have free speech. Just like what happened with me on Google+, at any point, if you're using a centralized web server, they can shut you down and just shut you up, which is really bad if you have dissenting opinions or if you want to change the world from how it's currently going. Because vested interests don't want you to be able to talk about the things that change their power structure. And so once this happened to me, I wanted a way to communicate. So I started looking for other options that could change how you could communicate with people. And back in 2014, there wasn't a lot of different decentralized networks to talk to people. There was stuff like Mastodon, but Mastodon creates its own issues in that you're trading that power structure of the big Twitter for whoever is running that Mastodon instance. Let's say I would have spun up a Bitcoin Mastodon back at the time, and there was one back in the day called bitcoinhackers.org. I think it still exists. That kind of came up and became a big topic during the block size wars of 2017. Inside of Bitcoin hackers, if you spoke about larger blocks or different things like that, they would actually ban you off of Bitcoin hackers. And while that necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing because big blocks wasn't the way to go, it still created a thing where there wasn't actually free speech. It gave the owner of that instance too much control over anything that could be said within it. And it is kind of decentralized where you can have other instances, but that same instance owner can say what other instance can talk with the users on Bitcoin hackers. So it never really was that true solution. I then kind of got looking into other solutions that would use private public key pairs But the solutions I was looking at there often were built on other shitcoin projects, and that's kind of a bad issue right there, right from the start, because then you're forced a shitcoin rather than Bitcoin. And a few years ago, I actually stumbled across something new, and that was called Nostr. Nostr is quite a bit of a different protocol from there. It stands for notes and other stuff transmitted by relay. So the way Nostr works, instead of having a single instance that's ran by anybody or a single website, it splits the concept into two parts. The one side is client side, and the other side is the relay side. So if we think back to our Twitter example, you can imagine that Twitter.com is the client. There's other clients for Twitter as well that already exist. So you can use things like Knitter, which is an open source viewer that kind of keeps some of your metadata away from Twitter's prying eyes. But the problem is everything you submit on Knitter or Twitter goes to one single, we'll call it a relay, and that's just the Twitter corporation. They control the database of all the information that you share with them. Again, if they don't like it, they can delete your information right from there. This is a huge issue. Nostr changes that because it splits those parts apart from one another. You can have clients, so anybody can run and create a client. It's all open source information, which is the other benefit of it. And then you can actually broadcast as a user to multiple relays. So whenever I want to say something that's revolutionary, challenging the powers, I don't have to just submit it to just Twitter, who can then delete that information. I can submit it to 20 relays, or I could even submit it to all relays that are available out there in the world. And any of them can choose to store it or not. But then any user that wants to find it can go out to those relays and search for that information. Maybe even more importantly, Nostr is built on public-private key pairs just like Bitcoin. When you go to create an account, if you want to call it creating an account, you're just generating something on a graph that proves your ownership. You'll have a public key, which is often seen as npub1, a long string, but then you have a private key, and that private key is what determines that any message that's transmitted from that account came from the person who controls that key. Going back to the example of me talking smack about Elon, if I was to broadcast a message, you know on Nostr that it came from the person who holds those keys. There's no way for the relay to then edit that message and turn it around and change the message that's being sent. That to me is one of the largest, most beneficial things of the whole ecosystem, because it identifies that the truth that is being spoken, truth that was meant to be spoken, and there's nobody that's interfering with that. Even more importantly, is there's nothing to stop that information from being shared, because if one relay decides to censor, I can take and run my own relay, and then I can broadcast it out to many other players that would then share the information from there. And it also incentivizes relays to share this information, because if they don't, then it creates a market influence where there's going to be relays that do share it, and the more information, the best competitors. And even looking back to my old example on Google+, if I was to be banned by a single relay, let's say going back to kind of the MVK example, he didn't like that I was promoting one thing, he can only ban me on his one relay. So I could just take the information that's there and rebroadcast those events or those notes out to any other relay on the network to be stored. Or I could just put it on my own relay at my house, store it there. So it actually gives you true data ownership, much different than what we've had in the past. And so kind of looking at that, it changes everything. What we're talking about here is mostly social, which is kind of the notes side of it. But Nostr isn't just about social media. The other stuff maybe becomes even more interesting. Because data can now be owned truly by the individuals that have it, you can do many more things. You can create networks that are built from there. If you want to create a thing that maybe allows for transactions to be broadcast in Bitcoin, but in an offline manner, you now have a data storage system that can be used by anyone in the world without any restrictions. Going back to that, when I started the Good Morning Bitcoin radio station, I wanted a way to, every time a new podcast came on the station, to just broadcast a tweet that said, hey, such and such podcast is on from such and such podcaster. Listening live now on GoodMorningBitcoin.com. I applied for a Twitter API to do that, and it's been 2-3 months since I applied for that, and I've never been given an approval or a denial, only that we'll look and see. With Nostr, within the weekend, I was able to develop a bot that automatically connected to it and broadcast these messages right to Nostr. That's the power of open source. I didn't need to seek approval from Elon to say I want to do something. I was able to take my data and broadcast it however I want because I own that data. And so for anybody here that's interested in starting with Nostr, there's a ton of different clients that you can. If you can give me another slide jump. If you're looking at clients, if you're mobile based, of course there's Android and Apple. On Android, probably the most popular client is one called Amis, but there's other ones like Plebster and Iris, Current, and many more, because again, it's open source. Anybody can build these clients. These are some of the ones that are available in the different stores, but with Android, everything's open source. So there's a number of clients, even beyond these, that you can download from GitHub and install on your phone. And so you can build your social experience however you want. Same goes for Apple. If you're on there, the most popular is something called Damus. But there's also Current and Iris available inside of their stores respectively as well. But then you get into the web, and I think this is maybe the most exciting part to me. Anybody can code up a website to look how they want it to look. And so there's things like snort.social. There's one called Nostragram, which kind of gives the result of an Instagram style site. There's Primal. There's a number of these different sites, and anybody can code these to display the data from relays however they want, which is a huge change from the requirement of centralized providers saying how you can interact with data. So if you all would be open, I would love for you all to download one of these, set up your npubs, and share it inside of Orange. I'd love to give each of you all a follow on your Nostr accounts and kind of continue sharing from there. But I don't want to go too deep into details about all the technical parts of Nostr. There's a load of things we could talk about, like NIPS and such, which are the ways that it's kind of improved, or how things change inside Nostr. But unless you all have some questions, I'll kind of open it up from there and just kind of let us kind of flow as a conversation. Awesome. So NIPS just stands for Nostr Improvement Possibilities. If you're familiar with Bitcoin, it's very similar to BIPs. Anybody can write one of these. It's something that the community can then look at it and then decide how we're going to interact with the changes. So each one gets assigned a number, and then clients can determine which ones they want to approve. It's the same for relays. Once you have a NIP, you can define how that data that's going to be stored there is used. So for example, I think it's NIP 04, which defines how direct messages. NIP 05, some of you all were sharing in what looks like an email address. That's another way to kind of identify users. I was talking before, everybody's a public key pair. So you usually get this giant thing that looks like npub1 and a long string after that. NIP05, which is one of the NIPs, allow you to do a DNS verification to where you put what actually isn't DNS, we won't go there, a little web verification to where it looks like an email address. And so you saw Peachy's address is peachyhuddle@zbd.ai. If a client supports NIP05, you can just type that in to find Peachy without having to know her npub1 Peachy and search for that long string. And so these NIPs are just ways that the software can actually improve to get even better as time goes along.
I have a question. How does zapping work? What are zaps?
Oh, that's another way to kind of tie into NIPs. So another NIP implemented the idea of what's known as zaps and as I talked about, this is all open source. So anybody can integrate these things however they find the most useful. And so a zap is a way to replace social media likes. And likes are unimportant. Anybody can go on something and say, I like it. But what does that really mean? It doesn't really mean anything. It just means that one user clicked a button. But there's nothing that really demonstrates how valuable that content is. A zap is a way for users to share real value in the form of Bitcoin Lightning to the creator of a note. So let's say I put a note and say, hey, I'm doing a Bitcoin presentation in Orange about Nostr. Anybody can then zap that message some Bitcoin via the Lightning Network, and then they will be able to, the user that sent that message will get that value, but it also gives an awesome metric to determine content's value, because now that content has actually received monetary value to show that it's good. So it's kind of a new way to sort all the content of the web based on its economic value as opposed to just simple likes. So Stubbs had a question as well. He said, let's talk about relays. How do I choose relays? Can I run my own relay? And I think that's a great question to start with. I think at the moment, last I checked, there was hundreds of relays. There may even be into the thousands now of relays. So how do you choose? What do you kind of look at? Well, for a lot of users, they may never actually look at it at all. A lot of clients will predefine what relays they're using. So you'll go on and unless you go into the settings, a lot of times you will never actually even see the relay backend. But relays can be edited, as I said. So if you're a user, you can go through, and I can't remember the name of the site now, but you can go in and there's a couple different sites that list every single relay that's available. So you can look and determine what functionality those relays have. Because as I said, different relays support different NIPs. For example, there's a NIP that's delegating your account authority to somebody else called NIP 26. That one's not supported on a lot of relays because it's kind of a newer feature that's still being worked out. And it's also a little bit more resource intensive for relays. And so that's one way that you can actually look. You can look and see what relays support different things. You can also look to see what relays your friends are on. Because these relays, you connect to a relay to find data. If you just start your own relay and you're just only going to connect to your one relay, you're not going to get the full information for the whole network. And so to do that, you will search out maybe your friends. You can actually, because this is all public, you can go on and look on my profile and see what relays I connect to. So if you're trying to find somebody, you can actually go through and look at all the relays they connect to, and then connect to those same relays, try to find the best one for you. And I think that right now we're still in this early stage where relays are going to differentiate themselves to where there's going to be major relays that everybody uses, and then there's going to be other relays that are maybe more niche specific to different either NIP types or even just different communities. And we've already seen this because some relays have to deal with spam, because this is an open protocol. You can spam messages, just like I created a bot that broadcasts a new podcast opening. Somebody could create a bot that broadcasts vulgarities constantly. In fact, early in the days, somebody created bots that would broadcast pornographic images constantly. And so that's another way you can choose your relays, their spam protection, to see how well they are mitigating these different attacks. And one way that this has happened early on is that different relays have asked for payment to broadcast to those relays. So they actually limit you from broadcasting unless you've paid them and define that you want your MPub to be the one to do it. This drastically reduces spam because you now have something on the line. If you start doing the same pornographic bots, they will then ban you from the relay, so you lose that economic value that you put up on the front end. So to get to the real answer of how you choose, it's up to each individual user to determine what relay they want to be a part of, who they want to share their information with. Maybe you don't like the person that's running that relay, so you don't even want them to have your data. It's up to each individual user, but you can actually make that judgment based on technological choices, social choices, and a wide range. Talking about the different MPubs, just like, I don't know if anybody's familiar with vanity addresses on Bitcoin. Your account is just a public-private key pair. And so you can mine public-private key pairs to find ones that you like. Back in the day, people would make Bitcoin addresses that says one Antonopoulos. That way it's kind of gives you a little bit more of a human readable interface. So you can do the same thing on Nostr. You can mine your identity. Essentially, you're just going to generate key pairs until you find one that has a public key that's something that you like. And so Peachy essentially ran a program that searched millions of different possible key pairs until she found one that said MPub1 Peachy, and then she was able to use that. Same for me. I have MPub1, essentially Patrick, but it's there's no I inside the Beck programming, so it's M1 PATRLCK, same look. So there's a little bit of a journey to try to find the one that you want. But you can also generate it by, if you have a hardware wallet, you can even generate it from the same keys, generate your Bitcoin address. That way you have a shared secret to kind of keep that more private. And so use cases. I see that question. Central Salad had mentioned that, asked like, what are some of the use cases for Nostr beyond just social? And honestly, that can be almost anything, because Nostr is, at its root, what Nostr really is beyond anything is a data storage solution that gives sovereignty to the individual users through their pub key. So as far as use cases, I don't even think we've seen a fraction of what will come from this. But some that excite me are actually ones that directly relate to Bitcoin, because you could create a full network that's a secondary. If you imagine Lightning, you could create a full network that is all broadcasting the transactions offline outside of the Bitcoin network, but that are just tied into essentially an on-ramp to Nostr. So I think that's going to be one of the most interesting ways to have value transfers, decentralized movements through things like Nostr. But there's already ones where you can store data on relays, like images. I believe it's NIP 95, if I'm not mistaken, defines an ability to, most of these relays just store text at this, just simple ways to store the text of messages. But if your relay supports this NIP95, then you can actually store different stuff like real data, and so you can store pictures. This is going to be much more taxing on the relays that support that, because now instead of storing very light text files, you're also storing heavy data files. But they can actually deliver data to the network to be decentralized file storage. As far as meaning for a Bitcoin on-ramp, so I guess my thought there is, let's say Lightning, you wanted to create a network like Lightning where you could send Bitcoin for no cost. You could create a way to tag the original Bitcoin base layer transaction and then make any movements be transferred via Nostr at a essentially free value. And then you'd have like a pegging thing where it would almost lock it in, just the same as you do with Lightning, I guess would be kind of the concept. The real exciting part to me is that this is all very new. It's been around for a couple years. It started kind of being built up, but it wasn't until around a year or so ago that Jack Dorsey from Twitter first started kind of sharing about it, and that's when it's really blown up as far as Nostr usage and engagement. And so there's not been a lot of companies supporting Nostr yet, but this is drastically changing. So I think that we've not even scratched the surface of where this will lead. Companies that are going to be supporting it and bringing more value to the.
Do you think that Twitter, its future, is as being both a Nostr client and maybe being like a paid relay?
I think that makes a ton of sense. I also think it's going to be an interesting play out, kind of looking at it. I think it's very similar to how Bitcoin will replace the dollar. Eventually, I think everyone in this room would agree that we're going to hit hyper Bitcoinization and that you'll only need Bitcoin. You won't need the dollar at that point. I think the same thing will occur with Twitter and other social platforms. If they're big enough, just like the dollar, I think the dollar may be one of the last ones to ever use Bitcoin because they want to keep their hegemony going. And I think that you'll see that with a lot of these major social networks. They may not adopt it at first, but it becomes the same reason that we believe in hyper Bitcoin. The network effect, as more and more users interact with an open source network, they will have an economic cost to not participate. Because eventually there's going to be more users on Nostr than there are in their siloed walled gardens, which will make them almost be forced into it. So I do think with enough time, hopefully we'll see Twitter just become another Nostr client. But I think if anybody, there might be one of the wouldn't, because they'll have their own hegemony. They'll try to people in their walled garden. But hopefully we'll see them adopt the technology, and then they can just be a client and let everybody still access their data. But that's the most exciting part, is it creates the thing where we don't need Twitter because it's open. There's already a number of bot accounts. I saw one that takes all of NASA's tweets and just relays them over to Nostr. And so it essentially eats out the Twitter network, because if I'm an end user and I just want to keep up with NASA stuff, I don't need to be forced into Twitter anymore. And so with enough time, I don't see users seeing the benefit of being on these networks outside of Nostr, because you'll be able to get the same data within Nostr, but you wouldn't be able to get that same data inside of the Twitter client unless somehow they're also pulling and still using Nostr on a backend. So Going back to Zaps though, if anybody does share your things, I'll make sure and go through and follow you guys. And going to Zaps, there is one thing you need to do as a little extra step. On your Nostr profile, you don't have a Lightning address connected automatically. So to receive these Zaps, you do have to sign up for a Lightning address or just have an LN URL wallet that you'll put that LN address inside of the settings on your account. So that way it kind of links the two together. So if you've not yet enabled Zaps on your account, you can go get a wallet from Alby, Zebedee, Wallet of Satoshi, any of these different wallet providers that are Zap enabled, and then you can link that to your account. If you post stuff on socials, I can come through and leave you a little tip and zap you some value just for sharing your latest raid on Nostr.
Yeah, Patrick.
Uh, Thank you so much for sharing, Patrick.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, guys.
Patrick and I were actually talking earlier with OrangeMart about Nostr, and OrangeMart got very excited because Patrick and I were talking about, wouldn't it be cool if your vending machine was something that you could sign into, like with your Nostr private key, or maybe it could produce one for you if you don't have one. And then every time you put up a trade offer, that's actually broadcasted out on Nostr. And then every time someone maybe accepts your trade offer and zaps you some sats, it triggers the vending machine to release the item. So that way we could have peer-to-peer Bitcoin payments in Rust through the vending machine, and the added benefit of being able to build a reputation, because in future wipes, you know how the island gets completely destroyed and we start again, you'll be able to use your same Nostr private key to log into your vending machine and have your same store, your same brand, your same marketing, and all your same socials, all your content, and your trade history and reputation follow you. And so OrangeMart got very excited by what Patrick and I were discussing and has committed to a bounty of at least 1 million sats to help this get built. And the details will come out in the OrangeMart website and in the development discussion and Discord. So that's really exciting. Thank you again, Patrick, for helping us all learn about Nostr.
Thank you guys so much for listening in, and I hope to see you guys on Nostr and send you guys some sats.
Yeah, that was a fantastic presentation, like what Stubbs says. It was so good. Thank you, Patrick.